Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ajay, for the introduction, and actually Khaki Toes for inviting me. Though I need to qualify the thanks slightly, because for two reasons I felt I was starting at a bit of a disadvantage with the talks. One, as Ajay said, I no longer live in Bombay. Like a lot of people, I sort of left about 4 or 5 years back, and I live in Goa now. And I no longer feel much connection with the city. So mostly what I am talking about today has been done on my past work. And I'm very aware that Mumbai is a city that never stays still. It's changing all the time. And, the Mumbai that I knew in the last 3 or 4 years has already started changing. I will probably never be able to do this talk again. Secondly, I'm at a real disadvantage because two weekends back, Chinmay Damle gave an absolutely brilliant talk on the history of Mumbai's public dining. This talk is up on Khaki Lab's YouTube site, and I really recommend you read it. Chinmay, for those of you who don't know, is a Pune-based historian who is doing absolutely brilliant work with original sources, particularly in Marathi and local newspapers. And He writes a column in the Hindustan Times, which is, honestly, it is the best food history column anybody's writing in India at the moment. It is absolutely brilliant. I really hope somebody will collect it at some time, and full kudos to Khaki Labs for seeing it and asking him to give this talk. And again, I said his focus is Pune, and honestly, for very Mumbai-centric people like me, his talk is actually transforms your attitude towards Pune. Pune emerges no longer as Bombay's like poor cousin, but as this very complex city with of its own. Yeah, but nonetheless, Chinmay did a fantastic presentation on the evolution of Bombay's public food culture. So it left me to think, like, what can I add to it so that I can, I don't try and duplicate what he's saying, but, add a few more insights. So I'm going to do it quite differently. While Chinmay looked at it chronologically, pretty much, and, up to pretty much independence, I will take a slightly more modern period. And secondly, I'm not going to do a chronological history really. I'm just going to give you snapshots, which is why I've titled this talk 10 recipes or from 10 cookbooks, sort of, which give you snapshots of Bombay history from different times. And we'll analyze that. I did this because, I think cookbooks are really valuable resources for food writers, food historians. And in a way, perhaps one thing I'll demonstrate with this recipe is how food writers like me can use recipes to read a lot more than is often just given. You read beyond the recipe, through the recipe. To some extent, it's also a plea for people to collect these cookbooks. Some of the cookbooks that I'll show you, some of them are very common. Some of them are no longer common. Some of them are actually what we'd classify as ephemera, which would have been thrown away. And luckily, I managed to get my hands on some of it. Honestly, when somebody, I hate to say sound morbid, but when someone dies and their stuff starts getting thrown out, time and again, especially unfortunately with women, I find that their archives, their papers are the ones that get discarded easiest. Please, if you are in the situation and somebody, an aunt, a neighbor or something, and people are throwing away the recipes, please try and grab onto their papers, because there's often fascinating ephemera. I'll give you one example in the course of this talk, which is unfortunately, cookbooks were often printed on very bad paper. Nobody treated them very seriously. They don't really last very well, and this is a really sad state of affairs. We need to preserve this sort of documentation in a big way. So, like I said, I'm starting with 10 recipes. These are completely random. I could have selected, 10 others quite easily. And then I'm also going to cheat a bit. I'm going to do a pre-recipe and a post-recipe. So I'm also terrible at doing presentations. Luckily, my friend Raji has helped me do this. And Sujay is going to help me take you through it. So this is the first one. This is a sort of pre-recipe, and I'm including this book. Many of you will be familiar with it, The Colloquies and the Simples of Drugs of India by Garcia de Orta. This was one of the first not secular books, probably the first secular book printed in India, printed in Goa, as it happens, thanks to a printing press that pretty much by accident made its way to Goa. So this book was printed in 1563. Um, the Bombay Canal, Garcia de Orta, as many people of you will know, was a famous botanist and who is the first to describe in depth many of the plants of the Western Ghats and also others that he got through trade in India. It is a fascinating book. It is a very readable book because it's done as he says colloquy. So it's a done in a form of a dialogue between him and a friend and a few other characters who drop in from time to time. Um, and particularly from a Bombay point of view, it gives us a fascinating uh, sort of shout out to Bombay. Because Garcia Otto, while he was based in Goa, he was at some point he took a lease on the islands of Bombay, which were controlled from Goa at that time. And in the course of the colloquies, he gives what may be one of the first printed references in a Western book to Bombay, the word Bombay, Bombayan, as he says. And what is I love, if you can show the next slide, is that it comes in the context of mangoes. If you can read it, this is the colloquy. He says that he's talking to his friend, and this boy suddenly comes and says that, "Sir, it is Simon Toscano, your tenant in Bombay. And he has brought this basket of mangoes to present to the governor, and he says that he has made the best." And he says that when he has made the fast, he will come here to rest. So I thought this was wonderful. That this says something that is about Bombay and its obsessions with mangoes. That one of the first references to Bombay, even before the city as such existed, was in the context of mangoes. Just go to the next slide, and you'll see that it's not just that. Could we go to the next slide? That it's not just that Garcia Orta refers to mangoes. He actually says, and that yes, please send some mangoes to the governor, but keep some for me too. And that's such a wonderfully human touch because, as we all know, Mumbaikars are obsessed with mangoes. When it comes to mangoes, we can be incredibly selfish, and it's built into our history, as we said from here. So this is the sort of pre book. It's not one of my 10 things. I said I'm cheating a bit. So for my first recipe, could you go to the next one, please? This is a book. There were several books of this kind published in Bombay, also Calcutta and Mumbai around the time. This is called Indian Cookery Journal for Young Housekeepers by an Anglo-Indian, but she's identified as the late Mrs. J. Bartley. My edition, which I think I picked up at a now sadly disappeared bookshop called New and Secondhand at Dobi Talao, is from 1959. But this is the 10th edition, and it lists the 7th edition from 1935. So, and I have no idea when the first edition was printed, but we can probably assume that it was sometime in the 1910s, maybe around 1910s. And it is a very comprehensive and actually an excellent guidebook to Bombay. You can see it's a Bombay book because it uses a lot of local names for fish and for fruit. One thing I'd like to point out, go to the next slide, please, is that it talks about the presidents. Sorry, the next one, just a minute. It talks about the Bombay presidency. And this is something to remember that Bombay presidency at its limit was a remarkably wide-ranging place. It went deep into the interiors of Maharashtra, but it went all the way west up to Aden, and at one time even included like the really mysterious island of Socotra. And foods and products would come in from these places. There was a period for about 20 to 30 years when Bombay became an entrepot for coffee to Europe. I mean, the building of the Suez Canal quickly terminated that, but a lot of coffee would come from Yemen and the Arabian coast to Bombay, be repacked and sent around the Cape of Good Hope to Europe. Now, the out of the many recipes here, the one I've picked up is the one you can see over here, dried bumbalo stew, which is of course, Bombay duck. And one cannot do a presentation on Bombay and not talk about our the very beloved and very peculiar fish, the Bombay duck. Now, there are so many weird things about Bombay duck, particularly the fact that for most of the world, they know Bombay duck as in its dried form, whereas in Mumbai, people are lucky enough to be able to eat it in its fresh form, which is utterly delicious. Even in Goa, it's quite rare to get fresh bombil. You get dried bombil, but not that much fresh bombil. And this is really something unique to Bombay, being able to eat fresh bombil, being able to eat, the semi-dried bombil, what they call bambucha bombil. Um, but I've used a dried Bombay recipe. Can we just go back to the previous slide, which shows you that, no, the previous slide, please. Yeah, dried Bombay stew. This could be, you could make this recipe with Bombay ducks anytime, especially in the monsoon. And I chose it because dried fish has a very, very deep connection to the history of Bombay. One thing Chinmay highlighted very correctly in his presentation was that for a long time, I mean, Bombay was a pretty poor place. It was not seen as a very desirable place. Calcutta, even Madras was where the money was. Bombay was this sort of place on the side. It was pretty much a punishment posting, mainly because it had very few sources of revenue. I mean, Madras had textiles, Calcutta had opium and indigo and stuff like that. Bombay, what did it have? I mean, yes, there was opium, as we know from Amar Faruqi's Opium City, that opium was traded through Bombay, but it was not a very legal trade. A lot of it also went through Daman and Diu. And From the East India Company's point of view, Bombay was a bit of a loss. It didn't generate much revenue. One of the few sources of revenue for Bombay was actually alcohol, in terms of toddy, from the coconut trees. Now, the local practice was to fertilize coconut trees with dried fish, including particularly dried bombil. So there was a sort of a synchronicity where the dried fish was used to fertilize the coconut trees to make them produce well. The problem with this is as you can imagine, it's stank to high heavens. I mean, Bombay, there is a constant mourn among early British accounts of Bombay about how much the cities would stink. And the same arguments that we still get, about fish drying and fish smell in places like Bandra and Juhu and Versova. These arguments have been going on in Bombay for centuries. And it was something the British hated, but at the same time, they depended for revenue on the alcohol, the abkari tax, which was indirectly linked to the dried fish. And this was a real conundrum that dried fish was important for the economy of Bombay, for the diet of Bombay, because especially now, as in the monsoon, in pre-refrigeration days, dried fish was critical, as it has been right down the west coast. When the boats can't go out any longer, you depend on dried fish, and yet dried fish made the whole city stink. This is why I said dried fish and Bombay are a connection that goes very, 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 very deep, and that's why I use this dried Bombay stew as my first recipe. But as I said, the point to remember is that Bombay was a pretty poor place. Let's go on to the next slide. The next slide, please. Next, yeah. Okay, so this is a great cookbook, Curries and Bugles, a cookbook with the British Raj, Jennifer Brennan, a brilliant, brilliant writer who sadly died, actually, a very unexpected death about 50 years back in a fire in San Diego, which are pretty much forgotten in Bombay. But this is one of the great cookbooks because it is a cookbook of the Raj, but looking back at it from a child's point of view and without this sort of memsab sort of attitude that you get in books like Mrs. Bartley's cookbook. The one recipe I got from this is not a particularly Bombay focused book. She really didn't live in Bombay very much, hardly at all. But she got a very key Bombay recipe, and that is the Baikala Club souffle recipe. Can we just go on and I'll show you the Baikala Club souffle recipe? Just okay. Sorry. Then next one, we'll come back to this one. So Chinmay talked about the Baikala Club. It was the famous Bombay club. If you just go to the next slide, you'll see a picture of it. Um, and this was the famous Bombay club. And it was key to the sort of European social life at a higher level at least. And what this recipe shows is that alcohol was absolutely essential to British life in Bombay. Basically, the British survived the climate and the lack of business opportunities and the general misery of living in Bombay by drinking themselves silly. I mean, if you look at the early sort of advertisement pages in the Times of India and newspapers like that, it's full of detailed shipments for alcohol. Basically, people drank a lot, whatever they could. And if you look at this recipe, it is actually a recipe for alcohol in solid form. I mean, just you can just go back so we can focus on the recipe for a minute. It's basically like if you've had a vodka shot, a vodka jello shot, this is pretty much what it is. It's gelatin and with cumel. Cumel is a cumin-based liqueur, chartreuse, which is the herbal-based liqueur, curacao, orange juice, and Benedictine. Time Out magazine actually when it was there, actually got Chef Ananda Solomon to make it. And he was like absolutely shocked at how incredibly strong. This is basically, I said, it's a dessert that is way to eat to drink alcohol in solid form. The other thing I'd like to mention over here is about ice. Ice was a huge preoccupation for the British in Bombay, simply just to survive, to survive the climate. And there was no easy way of getting ice until around 1835, when an American merchant called Frederick Tudor had this incredible, completely crazy idea of loading a ship full of ice, carved out and stored in the American winter, and sending it all the way to the other end of the world, literally to the other end of the world, first to Calcutta. And his calculation was that enough ice would remain in the ship, which essentially became a giant floating refrigerator, to be sold at a profit in Calcutta. The first shipment went to Calcutta, and it was hugely successful. People went crazy, and very soon, news came to the other side of India, to Bombay, and and the British in Bombay were screaming for their own shipments of ice. I think the first shipment of ice came in 1842, and even before it came, the news of it that a ship of ice was coming to Bombay was like it was so exciting that a public subscription was taken out and an ice house was built, in anticipation of the arrival of this ship. The ice house, as many of you know, was near the docks, obviously, so they wouldn't have to be transported far, and it is where the K.R. Kama Institute is now. There's a story that is perhaps apocryphal that the Scottish church next door was the air conditioned by cold air from the ice factory being channeled to the church. And this is one of these lovely stories one hopes is true, but I don't think there's any real proof of it. I want to say two more things about ice, because and the reason I'm talking about ice in connection with the club is that actually a lot of the British people bought their ice through the club. Actually, the clubs became sort of conduits for alcohol. Many club shops still have shops where you can buy alcohol, and also ice. People got their ice through the club. And the history of ice in Bombay is fascinating. I mean, it's not just the Americans and Frederick Tudor, though that gives you a direct American connection to Bombay, one of the first. Um, is that very soon, in a couple of decades, the technology came, people started making ice in a very dangerous process using ammonia. It was very common for the ice factories, ironically, to catch fire. But there are two reasons, why ice matters to Bombay. Many people don't realize this, though the engineers in the audience would know this, is that ice is actually, and I did a story on ice in Bombay where I spoke to some of the ice manufacturers in Bombay. This is where the insights come from. their biggest source use of ice was not commercial, not home use, not in this thing. Fish, some of it is used for fish. The biggest user of ice was the construction industry. Basically, huge slabs of ice would be put in those, cement grinding machines to prevent it overheating. And a lot of ice goes in basically producing cement. And to me, I found that such a fascinating metaphor that, like, all these buildings that have come up and defined Bombay have been built with ice, which I thought is just such a strange thought. The last bit of ice a story that I have, something really bizarre that I discovered, just actually it was during COVID. And there was so much talk about, like, vaccine distribution and dry ice and things like that. And then I found this fascinating recipe for the fact that the first recreational use of dry ice was from a guy called Dr. Samuel Herbert Ellsworthy, who was based in Bombay. And this was in the 1890s. Now, dry ice had been discovered long back. It was used as in scientific experiments, etc., etc. But nobody had thought of using it for private use until Dr. Elworthy. And I still can't believe the story, but uh, it seems to be confirmed. I mean, everything I've looked for confirms the story, and I have done it, and you can search for it. Dr. Ellsworthy was with the British Army Medical Corps, and he loved hunting. He would love going off into the jungles for shikar, but the one thing he hated was that he was not able to get ice in the jungle. So he thought, he knew, since he was a scientist, he knew about dry ice, and he figured out a way to create a container for dry ice, which he could take along with him into the jungle for shikar. And it worked so well that he actually applied for an American patent for it in the 1920s. And after this, the story becomes a bit like unclear. His patent lapse and things like that. And Dr. Ellsworthy sort of vanishes from the history. But unlikely as it seems, I mean, this history of dry ice and Bombay does seem to hold out. I mean, I would love someone to take it up and do more research. But anyway, I've talked about ice for too long now, so I think let's move on to the next the next recipe. Okay. Okay, obviously I've got my things slightly mixed up, but this is a recipe from the Time and Talents Club cookbook. If we can just go a little further, you might see a copy of the Time and Talents Club cookbook. This is of course one of the great Bombay cookbooks. It is produced by the Time and Talents Club, and I don't know if they're still not producing it. I guess that's it. This is my copy. It's, as you can see, it's a very battered copy, and my copy is the ninth edition. And this is also already it has already been around for about like 50 years since then. This is one of the great Bombay cookbooks because the Time and Talents Club, as many of you will know, is a club of South Bombay ladies usually who got together and in sometime in the 1920s, 1930s, and to do good things and organize events, organize like raffles. They did a lot of work during relief work during the Second World War, and they put together this cookbook, which is great. I mean, because it is across all its many editions, and I really hope, wish one thing I never did when I was in Bombay, and I hope somebody will do it, is to actually go to the Time and Talents Club, whatever remains of it, and see if they have all the different editions and do a sort of a timeline of how the book changed over the years. It is a fascinating book because it has Indian recipes, it has international recipes, and you get a sense of how international Bombay was at that time. People from different parts of the world coming in, giving their recipes. But sorry, can we go back a little bit, and I'll show you the actual recipe I've selected, which is from these. Yes. Now, yeah, but just one more back, if you please. Okay, so this is actually not from the main cookbook, and this is an example of what the ephemera, which easily gets thrown away. But luckily, in this case, my good friend Naresh Fernandez found this in his mother's in stuff that his mother was throwing away, and he gave it to me. It's a pamphlet of sorts, which was created. Again, I was not. It was very hard to see when it was created, and my copy is literally falling to pieces. but it's a pamphlet of recipes put together, and internally you can see that it's from around 1948. As you can see from this, sorry, 1950 or so. This recipe is where you get the date from. It says that uh, the most economical vegetarian dish at the subsidiary food exhibition held in October 1949 at the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. Our member, Mrs. Sarah Albles, is to be congratulated for that. And what is the most economical vegetarian dish? It is a dish for shark made with brinjal skins. If you, this may not sound very appetizing, and if you we could just go to the next slide. You'll see it's part of a whole bunch of recipes. Sorry, this is not, this is just from the same thing. It's an example of why the Time and Talents Club book is so amazing, because I can't think of anywhere else in the world where you have a recipe for bhajias and foie gras on the same page. But that's the Time and Talents Club cookbook. This, yeah, this slide, please. For subsidiary, nutritious, and anti-waste recipes. Now, this was obviously something that became important during the World War II years. Bombay was not affected directly by the Second World War, and it's interesting actually in Bombay's history that very few wars have affected the city directly, but it became a big relief center. A lot of soldiers were sent here. A lot of food was sourced from Bombay. My father, who was a boy at the time, did would tell me stories about rationing and conversely getting access to American rations, because Bombay, a lot of American soldiers were billeted in Bombay, and food would come specially for them. And he found, being an enterprising Gujarati boy, he found his way to get access to a whole bunch of this, and he extracted the chewing gum from this. Amazing chewing gum had never been seen in Bombay at that time, and he's very profitably sold the chewing gum to his friends. But there's a slightly different reason why I want to focus on this subsidiary nutritious and anti-waste recipes. This is immediately post-independence, and one point that needs to be made is that the years after independence were very difficult ones for India. Benjamin Siegel has done a brilliant book called Hungry Nation about the difficulty India had in just feeding itself immediately after independence. And one reason was because partition took away the wheat producing areas of the Punjab and the rice producing areas of east, what is now Bangladesh, and even before that, Burma, which had produced a lot of rice and pulses for India, had been separated. So many of the main food supplying areas of India had suddenly disappeared. And India and Benjamin Siegel's book, Hungry Nation, really shows how India was born in hunger and the extreme difficulties that the nation faced in the 1950s, including the 1960s, though there the hunger becomes more related to monsoon failures. And if you look at through the archives in the Times of India in the 1950s, there are many reports that confirm how hungry India was. I mean, like there were the Congress government would put many austerity measures. You were not allowed to cook, have organized marriages beyond a certain number of dishes. And clearly, the good ladies of the Time and Talents Club were taking this to heart, and they were coming up with recipes here, like the brinjal skin shark, or I think there's a recipe somewhere for eggs on banana skin, which sounds like both amazing and horrible, and an omelet without eggs, and there's a whole bunch of recipes like that. And I feel that food writers, recipes like this are a reminder, have to be a reminder for food writers in India that this is a country that has lived in hunger and has, yes, we are no longer in the state that we were in the 1950s, but hunger is still an issue in India. Malnutrition is still an issue in India, and food writers have to remember that we cannot, just write about food without responsibility to the sheer reality of hunger and malnutrition in India. So, and when you look at recipes like this, we are no longer there. We have come a long way. The green revolution has happened, and we are maybe even a net food exporter, though even in some areas like pulses, we have fallen really short and are importing pulses. Um, Hunger is still an issue in India, even though we are not there. So, when you read recipes like this, we can appreciate how far we have come, the progress that has been made, but the fact that hunger is still an issue, and recipes like, these that the ladies of the Time and Talents Club cookbook put together are still relevant. Maybe we should be talking about them in terms of sustainability and climate change, but recipes like this, even though this is a tattered pamphlet, are still very relevant. And I'm very grateful that we have something like the Time and Talents Club cookbook to tell us about this. Can we go on now, please? This is a recipe R.K. Lakshman had. Just go back. It's a cartoon that R.K. Lakshman had done for the Time and Talents Club cookbook. So you can see how deeply beloved it was. Okay, the next book is the East Indian cookery book produced by the Bombay East Indian Association. A wonderful cookbook about a very key Bombay community. About the East Indians. I'm not going to go into the history of the East Indians here because honestly, you should know this, or I'm sure there's another Khaki talk that talks about it. But obviously, the recipe I'm selecting from here is for bottle masala. Can we go on? You'll see the recipe on the next page. Right. So, bottle masala is the very key, very typical masala used by the East Indian community. It got its name as bottle masala because it's typically made in large quantities in summer. It used to be a very common sight and still happens with a few places that in summer the ladies would come from the villages and in the on the mainland. They're not East Indian, but they would be called by the East Indian ladies who would all have the stocks of masala ready, and you would put it on your terrace or your bungalow courtyard when bungalows still existed in Bombay, and the ladies would dry it and roast it and pound it, and that was your bottle masala supply, which you would then put in old beer bottles, which were dark in color, so that prevent the masala losing its pungency. Now, bottle masala, I think the next slide will show you a focus on the recipe. Bottle masala, is available, of course, and you can get it. And there's a lot of mystique that goes on about it. Every lady would claim to have their own secret recipe combination, though actually it usually just tastes the same. This recipe was very interesting for me because it made me realize something as a food writer that there is so much that is said when in Indian food writing about the mysteries of Indian masalas and the special recipes and the special ingredients. And it's that is like about 80% bullshit. One of the things that puts people off cooking Indian food abroad is that they're given this long list of ingredients that they all have to get and source and grind each time, which is like nonsense. Most Indians use packet masalas, and bottle masala is a very early example of a pre-made masala that would be used through the year. Secondly, if you look at the actual composition of the recipe, it's really quite interesting. Everybody goes on about masalas in terms of flavoring, but one of the realities is that masalas work as thickeners almost as importantly as flavoring. And bottle masala is a great example of this. I mean, if you ever used it, I mean, bottle masala recipes are really simple. You just fry some onions and garlic and tomatoes maybe, add a lot of water, and then you add the masala, and the masala flavors but also thickens. And if you look at the recipes, as I said, if you go to the next slide, I think I have a focus on the recipe. Yes, uh, most of the ingredients here, uh, rather than flavoring, are actually used in thickening. So look at the wheat. There's quarter kilo wheat that is used. It would add a certain toasty flavor, but it would mainly be used for thickening. Coriander seed, like again, is used partly for flavoring, but actually mostly for thickening. And so on. Many of the gram, the kaskas, things like that, all add as thickening. So when I first encountered bottle masala through an East Indian friend who cooked an amazing chicken curry for me, and then I actually looked up the recipe. It was a very key moment for me to realize that masalas making masalas in advance is something that has been done. The bottle masala was a very early example of this. So it's absolutely fine to use a packet masala. and that the use of masalas actually works as thickening as much as flavoring. That's something really important to understand. Okay, let's go on to the next recipe. Okay, this is an amazing book. It's a recently published book, and but I am I'm going I'm using it to talk about something from an earlier era. Shahu Patole's book Anna Hi Apurva Brahma came out about 7 or 8 years back in Marathi. And it was very quickly recognized as a truly important book because it talked about food through a caste lens very explicitly, something which is often avoided. I mean, Chinmay's lecture does talk about the caste issues that were involved in carnivals and food and restaurants in Bombay. But caste is something that Indian cookbook writers who tend to be from privileged castes have always avoided, whereas Shahu Patoli brought it up front and center. And that's why, as soon as the book came out in Marathi, many people said this book has to be translated. And with the help of Bhushan Korgaonkar, who I'm very happy to say is a friend of mine, it has been brilliantly translated into English, and this is one of the most important Indian books, food books that has come out in recent years. For the depth of the insights, I mean, Patoli does many things. I mean, like many Indian cookbooks talk about everything. Like I mean, Indian food is so diverse. How can one cookbook talk about the whole of India, or even just like even within a region like Gujarat, there are so many micro cuisines. Patoli, focuses just on the food of two communities in one region in Marathwada, and he goes into incredible levels of details. Now, the book has drawn attention, obviously, for caste reasons. Though by and large the treatment of it has been respectful. And of course the recipes which tend to get featured are the meat recipes. But actually, the book is as interesting for the vegetarian recipes, and he gives a very wide range particularly all the seasonal greens that are foraged. Now, the reason I've picked this up when I'm still in the period of the 1930s, 1940s, is this is the period when we see the growth of Mumbai's mills. And a lot of workers coming from interior Maharashtra, including areas like Marathwada, to work in the mills. And Chinmay talks about the carnival culture that grew up to service them. But there was another side to it, that when the women came, when they started bringing their wives, and the chawls developed, many of these women started suffering from malnutrition problems, which because they were not getting access to the foods that they would naturally have foraged or got in their villages. And we know this because of the work of a brilliant British researcher, Lucy Wills, who came to Bombay in around 1928. Now, Lucy Wills was a young British woman who had, in the 1920s, who wanted to be a doctor. At that time, it was still very difficult for women to become doctors, and she never actually managed to become a full-fledged doctor. So she became a medical researcher, and she got the opportunity to come to Bombay and work in Bombay. And specifically, she was supposed to work with women's health. Um, and her focus, became among two communities she worked with quite closely was the wives of mill workers and also Muslim women who lived mostly in Parda. And she found severe deficiency diseases with both these communities, anemia, which affected pregnancy to a large extent. And this was now this era, the 1920s and 1930s, was also when the ideas of the understanding of malnutrition globally was expanding very rapidly. This is also the era when vitamins were being discovered. And Lucy Wales in Bombay identified one vitamin. It's what we call vitamin B9 now. But at that time, she called it folate or folic acid because it was identified from green leaves from seasonal plants. Can we just go to the next slide? And what these women were lacking, living in the chawls of Bombay, was access to the all the forage greens that they would naturally gather. Now, Shah Patholi, his vegetable chapter is brilliant. He talks about exactly the season we're in, when the rains, when the rains start. That it is on one level a season of abundance, but at the same time, just go to the next slide. It's also a season where, however, for the Mahars and Mangs, the arrival of the season was a time of worry. It brought a big possibility of hunger pangs to follow. And, this is true across the Western Ghats. I mean, the monsoons, ironically, are a season of abundance, but also a season of hunger. And one thing that becomes really important are all these tiny little weeds and sprouts and leaves that come up in this season. Patholi talks about a very wide range of them. I've just chosen one, which is purslane. You'll get the recipe in the next slide. And these weeds, as Lucy Wills identified from her work on deficiency, were a great sign of the importance of consuming, the sort of diet that people would naturally be able to forage in their villages, but didn't always have access to in the cities. These weeds do appear in the city, and one thing I was fascinated in my years in Bombay was to see the chains that linked the interiors of Maharashtra with the city, so that at very specific times of the year, if you knew the right places to go to, which was typically not the markets, because the markets were dominated by men who were selling standard vegetables, but on the margins of the markets, outside the markets, so in places like City Lights Market. So sometimes you would just be walking on the roadside in Dadar or Parel or somewhere like that, and you'd see a lady with a heap of moringa leaves or safflower leaves or things like that, or purslane, which can we go to the next slide? Is what Hagarya, which is what Patholi talks about over here. This is an extremely nutritious green. It has very high omega acids. It's an interesting plant because if you it for from a botanical point of view, it's really interesting because if you have it early in the morning, it's acidic. Later in the evening, it's less acidic, and you still find this in Bombay. You can go to places like Bhaji Gali near Grand Float Station, near Dadar Station, and it still happens. I mean, is this going to persist as the city changes, as as the chawls come down, as people lose this memory? I mean, living in Goa, to some extent, I still see this. I mean, like just on Friday, I'd gone to Mapsa Market and I saw this amazing range of greens that had come out that were being brought into the market. Friday's is market day in Mapsa Market, and there was this wide range of forage greens that are still available. That there is still knowledge that you need to eat these greens to prevent malnutrition of exactly the kind that Lucy Wills identified. Lucy Wills, incidentally, her solution was to use Marmite. She gave the ladies Marmite, and they probably hated it. But at least that solved the deficiency disease. So the story of Lucy Wills is interesting. She's well known. I think there was a Google Doodle about her sometime. But to me, it's an interesting story because what it talks about a particular period which links the males and women, because women often get left out of the story. Ironically, the men probably had access to B9 because they would have eaten it in peanuts. Peanuts are a good source of B9. So the sort of chakna, the time pass that they would have eaten, could possibly have given them enough B9. It was specifically the women who was suffering from the lack. Okay, I'm really running out of time, so I'm going to go a bit faster now. Can we go on to the next the next recipe? Okay, Ruchira, great, one of the great Marathi text cookbooks, Kamlabai Ogle's Ruchira. There are two books. There are two volumes. This is one of them, and of course, it's a great guide to Marathi cooking. But I have chosen. Can we see the recipe? I've chosen a recipe for idlis. And the recipe, the reason I used Kamlabai Ogle's recipe for idlis is because to me, this is something that is important about Bombay. That people don't slot easily. If you're in a community, you will only eat your food. No, people in Bombay. were modern. They wanted to eat like Ruchira, if you look at it, is full of fascinating recipes, full of American recipes. There's a recipe for something called perfection salad, which was a big salad in the 50s. It's written in Marathi, but it's there. And I think people make a mistake that they look at these sort of very old cookbooks and think it's all only traditional, only authentic. No, absolutely not. I mean, like the women who compiled these cookbooks were in their estimation modern. Just the act of cooking, putting together a book like this was modern. They honored the traditional recipes, but they were also keen on giving modern recipes. And Italy's was something that was becoming popular. And of course, Kamlabai Ogle included a recipe for Italy's. Now, I just want to use this to talk about one thing that Bombay really pioneered, which was the sale of Italy batter, Italy mava. And one lady in particular, Mrs. Gomti Murthy, was really responsible for this. I did interview her once. She's passed away now, and her story is fascinating. Like she was from Matunga, the Bombay's like South Indian enclave. And she came to as a young bride in 1971. Her husband worked, I think, in the accounts department of a mill. And as she came, I think, from Coimbatore or somewhere near Coimbatore, and she bought this great new gadget, which was revolutionizing Tamil Nadu, which was a wet grinder, and perhaps it was one of the first wet grinders to come to Bombay. And she started making Italy batter in her house, and her husband started taking it to the mills where it became very popular with his co-workers, especially the Gujaratis who loved it. It was vegetarian. It was something they could eat, and they loved it. And around 1988, she told me that her family started facing problems. I think the husband lost his job. And one of his ex-co-workers, a Gujarati man, said, "Why don't you start selling idlis, as a job?" So Mrs. Gomti Murthy got into action. And this is a very Bombay story. It's a story of enterprise and, working on what you know and scaling up from there. And she started making large amounts of like idli batter in her thing, and steaming it in a pressure cooker. And her husband started taking idlis and selling it in the mill areas, and it was quite successful. And actually, bit by bit, we're all familiar with the idli vendors who come with the big steel dabbas full of idli and chutney and go around Bombay selling idlis. Most of them is made in Dharavi and places like that now. But this is how Bombay became enamored with idlis. And the story doesn't end there, because the Gujarati friends who helped um, buy his idlis, said that, we would also like our wives to start making idlis. So, but we don't have a wet grinder. So why don't you sell us the batter, sell us the marble, as you could say in Tamil. So Mrs. Gomti Murthy applied for a small and entrepreneur loan, and got the finance to buy a few more wet grinders. And she started grinding and started selling out, and started selling plastic packets of the batter. And again, it's quite perishable, so it has to go soon. But and this was something that would never have happened in Tamil Nadu. In Tamil Nadu, like, the idea of selling batter is impossible. Everybody had to make the batter at home. But Bombay was where batter became something by a commodity in itself. And Mrs. Gomti Murthy developed a whole business selling batter. Then other people joined in. There's this other company with, again, such a wonderful name, Jane and Iyer. Jane and Iyer, another Matunga enterprise. And bit by bit, now of course, ID, which is a Bangalore-based company, is now selling refrigerated idli batter across the country. But that this is a business that was born in Matunga, in Bombay, with one lady called Mrs. Gomti Murthy, and her wet grinder. So I'm probably not doing justice to Ruchira, which is a fantastic cookbook, but I wanted to use a recipe for idlis, not in Tamil, not in English, but in Marathi, because to me that says something very key about Bombay's syncretic nature, where everybody is swapping recipes and developing businesses as they go. Okay, next slide, please. Sorry, this is a close up. Okay, next. Okay, so now, as I said, this is ephemera, and this is a handbook for prestige cookers. The next one, just so that I'm not being paid by Prestige, is for Hawkins Vijura. So these sort of these again, this is an example of the kind of cookbook that often gets thrown away, but can be really interesting and tells you a lot about the importance of gadgets in kitchens. And I've written quite a fair deal about this. I mean, the pressure cookers, stainless steel, all this started coming in the 1960s and in the 1970s, and have totally altered the way in Indian kitchens cook their food. Hawkins was a Bombay company, and it's interesting that unfortunately, the company is notoriously averse to sharing details about itself. But one thing we do know is that the Hawkins the family behind it was originally in the insurance business, and in the 1950s they heard of this thing called pressure cookers, which might be useful in India, but people were scared of it because they had this tendency to blow up. So they actually used their contacts in the British insurance business to look at the instances of pressure cookers exploding, and decided that the guy it was possible to make one safe enough to use it in Indian kitchens. Of course, there are many stories of exploding pressure cookers, but by and large, between Prestige, which invented the gasket, to help fit better, and also to allow steam to escape, and developments like the Hawkins Futura. I'm going to be honest and say that I love Futura pressure cookers. So a lot of people don't like it because it doesn't whistle in the way pressure cookers are supposed to whistle. But these have absolutely revolutionized cooking. And for me, this is what often gets left out in talks about history. We have to talk about the what we actually used to cook with stainless steel. And I don't have time to talk about stainless steel, but there's a lot of fascinating writing on stainless steel and the whole stainless steel revolution in India, and how it was driven by the fact that it was easier for women to clean. Stainless steel is not a great medium for cooking. It doesn't conduct that well, but it's a great medium for cleaning. And again, we tend to forget that cleaning is as important as cooking when you're cooking on a daily basis. And that was the reason why stainless steel moved into Indian kitchens. I've just used two recipes from both these books. Both of these are recipes for dansag, because I felt I needed to do one shout out to Parsi food and Dansak, which again is such an iconic recipe. And Dansak is a recipe which, to me, just go on to the next two slides. So they're both recipes for Dansak. Interestingly different. Like this one uses mangoes. The other one is a more classic recipe. Note the reference to sambar powder, which I hope nobody actually uses South Indian sambar powder, because you should be using masala, which again you have to be in Bombay to know about. Okay, so I really am running out of time, so I'm going to like run through the rest. Can we just go on to the next to the next book? Oh gosh, I mean, I wish I could talk so much about these four little recipe books. They're wonderful, and they're real ephemera. I found them originally at Bandra station with the guy who was selling midday newspapers, because they were published by Inkilab, the Urdu newspaper, which was also owned by the Midday Group at that time. And this was just an initiative. I think it was an Eid initiative that the publishers of Inkilab had done to ask ladies from these four Muslim communities to put together small handbooks. And to me, I grabbed them when I saw it, and I went out. Actually, that day I went to a whole bunch of things, buying as many of these as I could find, because I recognized at once the importance. Today there are a few more. There are a couple of other Bora cookbooks. There's a Memon cookbook. There are a couple of different Konkani Muslim cookbooks. Kashmiri cookbooks, of course, are in no short supply. But by and large, Muslim home cooking is scandalously underrepresented in India, and we can speculate on the reasons for it. But these small cookbooks, which are in Urdu and English, and of course you have to read them from right to left. I mean, if you go to the recipes, you'll see some examples of the recipes. Are man now. And this is home cooking, sukiyaki soup. This is from the Bora cookbook. I mean, who would think of sukiyaki? It's actually a soup of mutton, mutton, cabbage, and spaghetti. But this is real home cooking of the kind that is absolutely delicious, but often doesn't get collected. But this is not the recipe I've chosen as representational. Just go on to the next one. Okay, this is again not Fanta orange ice cream. This is one of those recipes that sounds awful and it's going to taste absolutely delicious. I would love to eat this Fanta orange ice cream, even though it sounds completely like gross. This again is from the Bora cookbook, but can we go on to the next the next one? This is the classic Bora recipe, dal chawal palidu, and it's a vegetarian recipe. Again, look at the misconceptions that come up about Muslim cooking, about how it's all meat and this thing, etc. But no, this is a lot of these recipes in this book are completely vegetarian books. Can we go on to the next one? Okay, this is the cover that the cookbooks came in. A set of four cookbooks, and the things. I said this is just an ephemera. It would have been thrown away the next day most places, except for the ones that I managed to salvage, and it I also got from the midday office. Let's Okay. The next one is the recipe that I want to choose. This is from the Memon cookbook, Randleli Roti. This is an interesting book. It's a mutton stew with bajra chapatis, which are soaked in it. And if you know a little bit about wider Muslim cooking, this is a very fascinating book, because this is a very fascinating recipe, because this is an example of something very intrinsic to Muslim recipe. It's what you call a tharid dish. Tharid dishes are you find them across the Muslim world, but they basically, because they're supposed to have been favorites of the Prophet. He was supposed to be particularly favorite like tharid dishes, which are very frugal dishes. They are a little bit of meat, which you eat, which you sort of bulk out by adding rotis of some kind, which you then soak in, and the rotis soak up the gravy. And the tharid dishes, as I said, are found. You will find it from North Africa to Arabia, and this I instantly recognized as a Indian version of a tharid dish, randleli roti, and it's a frugal dish. Mutton with a lot of rotis soaked in the gravy. I just have one or two other recipes from these books that I want to share, because I love these books so much, and I really wish that somebody else would reproduce them, or just do more work on real Muslim home cooking. Just one or two more. I think they're from the Memon cookbook. Dokle ka salan. Okay, this is a reminder that Memons are Gujaratis, I'm half a Gujarati, and like with many Gujaratis, I've seen what is happening in Gujarat, and the way Gujarat is taking against Muslims, and disdaining its Gujarati heritage. But recipes like this could be a dal dokla recipe, with certain variations, obviously. And this is dokle ka salan. Is could be a Gujarati recipe. I'm sure Mosina, madam, if she's here, could tell us much more about it. But I just want one more recipe, which is actually the next recipe. This is a crazy recipe. It's called Royal Dokla, and if you can see, it's a recipe that includes rotis, pulses, and fish. Two types of fish, pomfret and surmai. I think it's there on the next page. Vegetables, pomfret, surmai, coconut milk. This recipe is crazy. It has everything in it, and it would be wonderful. And I had never even heard of this recipe until I picked up this book at Bandra Station. This is an example of why we need to really do so much more in preserving home cooking. Okay, I just have about two more to go, and then I'll liberate everybody. So let's go. Okay, this is one of the great Bombay cookbooks, and its history is really sad. It came out exactly 10 years ago. Prajna Desai put together this book after something that was called the Dharavi Biennale. It was an art exhibition that was trying to showcase the creativity that existed within Dharavi. And she decided to focus on food, mainly because she wanted to get women to talk. And she organized these workshops where she got the women of Dharavi to talk about recipes, and she finally focused on about 8 women and showcased them. And there is so much to unpack in this book, which, as I said, is such an amazing book. It is, number one, a bilingual cookbook. Prajna was absolutely clear from day one that it had to be a cookbook that the women who were writing it should be able to access it. Too many times we have had cookbooks in English, but which are not accessible. Another good thing about the Muslim cook booklets that just now that they were totally accessible again to the women who came in. Uh, Also, Prajna put in amazing some of the best food photography I've seen for Indian food, and Indian food is notoriously hard to photograph. Has come in this book, and the tragedy is this book is almost impossible to get. I mean, Prajna self-published it. She has never found a commercial publisher to produce it. I mean, if you need it, she still has a few copies left. You have to basically get it from her. And it has proved impossible to have a commercial publishing, even though this book has been acclaimed by food writers across the world. It is a cult cook. It is a cult cook. So somebody wants to know why it's called the indecisive chicken, chikane wali murgi. It's the recipes in the book, the explanation in the book. One of the ladies said something about it was a phrase that she used when somebody is just crazy. They run around in all directions like an indecisive chicken. And Prajna liked the phrase so much that she used it as the title for the book. I'll show you the recipe that I selected from this book. Can we just go on inside? Okay, this is Bharti Majewadia, the lady whose recipe has been selected. She's from the Kumbar community in Dharavi, again, a very key Dharavi community. And the recipe is for Bengan Bhatta, absolutely one of the most standard Indian recipes there are. But she puts a fascinating twist on the recipe. The bengan is roasted in the normal way, but when it's actually being mashed and fried and bunad on the tawa, she picks up a piece of broken pottery because remember she's a Kumbh from the Kumbh community. There's broken pots everywhere, and the recipe she puts the broken pot in the flame so it gets glowing hot and puts that with the bengan bhatta. So the bhatta gets this wonderful smoky taste, earthy taste, and then of course before it's served, that piece of pot is taken out and thrown away. But to me, this was so fascinating. Such a standard recipe like bengan bhatta, but so rooted in a particular place, in a particular community. The Kumbars the Kumbars of Dharavi, and with this special taste. And it's an example for us how the most basic Indian recipes can be tweaked and given a special flavor just by something like a piece of a broken pot. So I could do a whole talk on the indecisive chicken. Even better, Prajna could do a whole talk on the indecisive chicken. But as I said, this is the story of how this book has not got its due is truly a tragic one, and it's a shame on Indian publishers. One of the best things that has happened in recent years is that self-publishing has been possible, and the sort of like gatekeepers to publishing cookbooks in particular are breaking, and many different recipes are coming out. Yeah, my last formal recipe. Can we go on to that, please? Swati snacks. Now, I wanted to choose a recipe for the Gujarati community. As I said, I'm half a Gujarati myself, and so much creativity in food in Bombay has come through the Gujarati community. I was going to select one of Tarla Dalal's recipes for historical reasons, but then I just heard really sadly that a few days back, Asha Javeri had passed away. So, for my last recipe, I wanted to include a small tribute to her. She was an amazing woman, and I'm very happy that before she died, she was a very private, very shy person, but she actually got herself to write this book, which you could buy at any Swati Snacks. Among the many amazing things about it, this has to be the only book that has a blurb from Mukesh Ambani himself. I think that if you go on to the next page, you'll see the tribute. Sorry, this is Asha ji herself, but the next page I think has Mukesh Ambani's like tribute. Yeah, how many books have a blurb from one of the richest men in Asia? I mean that is an idea of the impact Swati Snacks has. But the book is really worth reading because it shows a lot of interesting things. One is the history of Swati Snacks is really interesting. It's such a Mumbai institution that we forget how long it's been around and how revolutionary it was. I mean, it was started by Asha Ben's mother, who Asha Ben was a very quiet person. She was very difficult to interview. I had some really frustrating interviews with her when I would ask her long, excited questions, and she would say yes, no. It was like, trying to get like, blood from a stone. I'm so happy that I wrote and the reason she wrote is that she was a very shy person. The book, the restaurant was started by her mother, Minakshi, who was a very dynamic person and, scandalized her community by starting a restaurant, which was totally, something that Gujarati women of her kind didn't do. And people would say, who is going to like pay to eat like ghar ka khana? And she was like, and she was like, no, I'm going to do it, and she just did it. And I think it was brilliant. I mean, some of people may remember the old restaurant before the Rahul Mehrotra reworking of it when there were just plastic benches and things. But the original restaurant near Grand Road Station. But it offered this sort of charts plus very home style dishes, things like the panki. And her brilliant insight, I think, was that people were no longer making those sort of dishes like at home, like things dishes like panki, because they were just fiddly. And unless a restaurant like Swati started making these home style dishes, they would start disappearing. A very, very critical insight. And to my mind, there is still very few places like Swati. Yeah, I'm a Swati like fan. The other restaurant is good, but it's not Swati. Sorry about that. But she died actually of diabetes. Meenakshi, the mother, and Asha Ben was the only daughter, and she was landed with the responsibility of running Swati. She told me, she writes in the book that she doesn't even know why it was called Swati Snacks. Her mother called it Swati Snacks and never told anybody why. And Asha Ben was suddenly had to was told by the family, well, you shut it or you run it. And she said she had no aptitude as a restaurateur, but she felt she had to honor her mother's recipes. And with the help of the Maharaj, and again, the book is a tribute to the Maharajas of Bombay, all these the Brahmin cooks who cooked amazing food. And it's a really interesting book because it talks about things that restaurateurs don't talk. Restaurateurs cookbooks are all about how amazing they are. Asha Bin's cookbook is exactly the opposite. It's all about why it's so difficult running a restaurant. And she talks about things like, how difficult it is finding quarters for staff. Most restaurant people don't even think about that. But, she started a whole program of buying rooms in chawls so that all the young men who work in Swati would have places to stay. And, it has lots of fascinating details like that. Unfortunately, the one thing it does not have is any of Swati's key recipes. But it has a few of your home recipes. I'll show you the one I selected. Can we just go on to it? Okay, it's a fascinating recipe. It's for puran poli made with green peas. Again, which to me is an example of sort of creativity that you get in Gujarati kitchens. I mean, we are so conditioned of thinking of puran poli made with chana dal, and this is a recipe of puran poli made with green peas. I also wanted the recipe because to me, puran poli is again a fascinating recipe because it's such a chameleon of a recipe. Every community in Bombay makes a variation of this of its own kind. There is the Maharashtrian style, which is very dry, and you have to eat it with milk. There is a Gujarati style, which is very rich and like loaded in ghee, totally simple but totally delicious. That's what you get. You get at Swati. Then there is her home recipe, which, as you can see, is made with green peas. There are Konkani Muslim versions which are cooked in coconut oil, and then fascinatingly, there are two versions of Puran Poli from the Beni Israeli community. And I'm sure somebody could guess why there are two versions because it would depend on what they were eating. If they were eating meat, then it would have to be a version cooked in vegetable oil. If they were not eating meat, it could be a version cooked with ghee. So for the Beni Israeli had two versions of Puran Poli, depending on what they were eating it with. And then, of course, there is the Parsis who make a cake out of it, Darni Puri, which becomes the Puran Poli becomes a cake. And to me, this is what is so fascinating about Bombay, about how all these basic recipes are interpreted, and this play that goes back and forth between communities with just something as simple as Puran Poli. And this is my last recipe, but I want to end on a note. As I said, I no longer live in Bombay. It's no longer my city, and also I feel that Bombay is changing. The Bombays that I remember, and most people talk about, is mostly South Bombay or Bandra, and increasingly that is no longer just Bombay. Bombay now exists in the vast suburbs, which are really Bombay. I realized this actually. I was one of the organizers of the Mumbai's Pride March, which usually happens around August Kranti Maidan and Lamington Road. Every year when we would do the Pride March, I would meet these young gay, lesbian, and trans kids who would come and they would tell me that this is the only time of the year we come to South Bombay. Otherwise, we never do. We live all our lives in the suburbs. At most, you might come to BKC to go to the VFS office for a visa or something like that. And I feel that it's important to any talk about Bombay to acknowledge the fact that that is Bombay now. As I mean, it's not the only Bombay. South Bombay is important. Salsette is important. The eastern suburbs are important, but also the vast Vasai, Virar, Thane, all that. This vast complex, conurbation that is slowly creeping towards Bombay, Nasik, Pune as one vast industrial conurbation. All this is now part of, in which it is the future of the city. And I wanted a recipe from there because these are places which have their own deep histories, as we know from things like the XR Hero stones, or from the history of Vasai, which used to be Basin, which used to be Portuguese. And all these histories, I mean, it's one thing I've realized partly because of the brilliant poet Akhil Katyal, who is now living in Bombay. He's living in Mira Road and is writing brilliant poems, which he puts on Instagram, which talk about the suburbs, about all these parts of Bombay, which snobby South Bombay people would never even have thought about, let alone visit. So I wanted a dish just to end this, which is to me is the future of Bombay, the Bombay that I am no longer part of, and this is a dish called bhujing. I don't know how many people have ever eaten it. It's a dish that became popular in the Vasai Virar area, mostly Vasai. It's a very weird dish. It's basically grilled chicken eaten with poha. It's an odd combination. I'll be really honest. I personally don't think it's a combination that really works. I mean, I was discussing this dish once with Ananda Solomon, and he says it doesn't work because poha does not absorb flavors really well. I mean, it's not absorbent like rice, and so it's a dish that shouldn't really work, and yet it does. And to me, bhujing, this weird dish from Virar, is also part of the history and the future of Bombay. As I said, it's not a history that is going to be my history any longer. But I'm grateful that Khaki Tours has given me a chance to talk about it, and that you've all been so very patient in listening to it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vikram. That was amazing. I think we could have gone on, and as Anandita here has commented, fascinating talk. And can we have a part two, please? So,
I'm not doing this. Is my last Bombay talk. I said no more talks about Bombay.
but this is really interesting. But the question I will ask you, with my use of my prerogative to ask you the first question is, um, so I want to talk a little about the unwritten recipes, right, which are passed down the generations. I mean, in my own family, I know that recipes have been passed down, and what it started out when my grandmother made it and what my cook makes it are completely different dishes. So, what do you think is lost or even gained when a recipe moves from being unwritten, sort of orally transmitted to published, a published written recipe in cookbooks or online?
I mean, there is always a difference. I mean, some things are very hard to put down. I mean, I actually learned an interesting lesson on this from Madhur Jaffrey when she came to Bombay, and I was, I've had the honor of being able to take Madhur around Bombay 2, 3 times. And one place I took her to was Highway Gomantak because she wanted to eat, proper Gomantak food. And Highway Gomantak is the family is from Goa. It's a Goa Hindu family, and she wanted to eat that. So I took her there, and the one dish she became fascinated with was the rice bakri. And she really wanted to know how to make it. And in Highway Gomantak, the Potnis family lives just behind the restaurant. So I went up to Mr. Potnis, and he didn't recognize Madhur Jaffrey, but actually his daughter-in-law recognized Madhur Jaffrey. And I said that she really wants to know how to make the rice bakri. Do you think your wife could tell us?" So he was like, "Yeah, sure." And so then we went behind, and Mrs. Portness was very happy to tell the recipe, and she gave Madhur the recipe. And the thing about someone like Madhur, who has had so much experience in understanding recipes, is that she listened to the recipe. She said she's leaving something out. I was like, what? And she was like, she said, she's not, she said, it's not that she's not trying to tell me. It's like some people don't pass on deliberately. But in some cases, mother knew instinctively something was not there in the recipe. And she asked Mrs. Portness again and again to this thing. And finally, Mrs. Portness remembered one very key detail that when the tawa is hot, you throw a little bit of water on it and create steam, and then you put the bakri on it. And so you need a little less oil, and also that gives it a sort of very characteristic scorched taste, which was part of it. And the thing, what was fascinating to me was that mother knew that something was missing, and was able to probe until she got it was a master class in how to get an Indian recipe. And you're right, if Mrs. Portness had just been asked to write that recipe down, she would probably have forgotten that detail about putting water on the tawa. I mean, I don't know what. I mean, one thing that is changing Indian food is the fact that more and more people are recording the recipes on videos and posting them on YouTube. In some ways, that is actually a better medium for transmitting recipes. And yeah, there is no easy answer. I mean, one has to accept that recipes will change and evolve over time, and some things will never taste the same.
Yeah. Just a follow-on point to what you said about digital mediums being used more, more and more now. Do you think it becomes more performance than preservation?
Yeah, yes, to some extent, but what's wrong with that? I mean, I'm all for giving cooks their due, just like Prajna did in Indecisive Chicken. So yes, some of it is performance, some of it is rubbish, some of it is like ridiculous recipes, but some of it is real. And I think it's amazing that housewives and regular cooks and Maharajas are you picking up their phones and turning it to face themselves and recording their own recipes. Is it perfect?
Right.
No, but it is documentation. And as I said, with this whole issue of ephemera and disappearance of documents, anything that documents food is great.
Yeah. So the two people you referred to, Chinmay Damle and Mosina Mukadam, are both on the call. And Chinmay said, "Thank you, Mr. Doctor, for the generous praise. Mrs. Bartley's cookbook was first published in 1892. Her name was included in the 1923 edition." He goes on to say, "Brilliant talk. Modern cookbooks that accompany microwave ovens and pressure cookers feature mostly vegetarian dishes."
Yeah.
Mosina says, "Jaika Kadwa." I hope
Well,
I
I want to say
pronounced that
one
correctly.
interesting thing about this
Sorry.
Hawkins Futura book.
Yeah.
I don't know when it was published, but it has a lot of recipes for beef in it,
Yeah.
and it's something that I don't think would happen today. So it's an interesting reflection on how something which was probably published just about 20 to 30 years back has changed.
When somebody's commented on that exact thing as you said, it's a long list of comments, so finding it is a little bit hard. But Mosina Mukadam says Jaika Kadwa. Again, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Is a very interesting Kokni Muslim cookbook published by Kokni Muslim community of Kadwai. What is the title of the cookbook of Dharavi? Was the question.
It's called the Indecisive Chicken.
So just going through, oh, there's tons of messages. So comments by people. Thanks for sharing about Chinmay Damle. Will watch. I missed it. Looks like, says Vinita. Suki says such a valid reminder about saving recipes from homes. Thank you. Thank you, Bharat and team, for organizing from lectures like the Chinmay's and Vikram Doctors. Rashmi asks, how did they source these
Please,
ingredients?
if you haven't heard
Yeah.
Chinmay's lecture, go back and listen to it, because I would like to think that my recipes, my lecture has been complimentary to his really brilliant lecture.
Right. Rashmi's question, which was earlier on your talk, was how did they source these ingredients? I'm assuming they refer to the British cookbook, the Anglo-Indian cookbook.
Sorry?
No, the question I think was how did they source these ingredients? And I think the context for that is while we were talking about the Anglo-Indian cookbook. So they're referring to the early, uh,
Oh, yeah.
the
Well, I
cookbooks
mean,
that were written.
there was a major trade in ingredients between Britain and India. I mean, this became one of the reasons why so many British food companies did so well. And there's excellent documentation about this from biscuit companies in particular. Cars of Carlisle in particular. There's a wonderful book called Rich Desserts and Captain's Thins. which talks about how the colonial trade became very important for British food companies. So yes, a lot of it was canned and sent
Right.
from Britain.
And Bharat's question is, which Indian communities were involved in cooking these dishes for the British?
Oh, yes, a great question. I mean, this was a real key important issue because the British had the troubles finding cooks who would handle beef and pork because obviously the Muslims would not handle pork, the Hindus would not handle beef. So in each part of India, each presidency, there are sort of a community developed. In Calcutta, it was this sort of northeastern community called the Mugs, who became the favored cooks. In South India, I think it was in Madras, it was various Tamil Christian communities, and in Bombay, it was the Goans. Goans, one big reason why Goans came to Bombay, and it's unfortunately something I didn't talk about, but that's a whole subject by itself, was to be cooks. There are a few books like Nilufar Ichaporia Kings, My Bombay Kitchen, a wonderful book that I would have loved to quote from, but I didn't have time. But I really recommend people read, where she talks about, she pays full tribute to her cook, her mother's cook, a guy called Andrew, who became the real repository of her family's Parsi recipes, even though he himself ate fish curry rice every day for his meals.
Okay. Look, there's going to be no time to answer all of these questions, so I'm just going to skip a few and ask the more interesting ones and some of the comments here. So Jinx Arkedkar has a very interesting comment. As a transplanted New
Thank you so
Yorker,
much for coming.
married into a Konkan Maharashtrian non-veg family, joined the American Women's Club in 1955. We produced wonderful cookbooks out of a Mem Saab's cookbook for life in Bombay. Lots of Indian recipes toned down for our less sturdy stomachs and a wonderful dictionary of all spices, ingredients, fruits, veg, meats. Some of our ladies lived by the book. So, I mean, lots of other comments too. Pratini.
Can I just add that Jinx Akerkar's other great contribution to Bombay was giving us Rahul Akerkar.
Pratiti Nath says the bottle masala recipe is truly interesting. Thank you for sharing such a rare piece of history. Um, Jyoti Kekar says a new view about the bottle masala as a thickening agent more than spice. Rashmi says, I see women near Dadar selling small quantities of foraged veggies and fruits. Jyoti Akerkar, in fact, she asked a question which I also wanted to know, which is even though the Kolis were the first inhabitants, were there no cookbooks about them? And let me ask you the question I had, which is kind of an add-on to that, which is I mean, if you go back to the Anglo-Indian cookbook or even the East Indian one, the question I had was who really had access to publishing their food stories in Bombay, and kind of notwithstanding the ones you mentioned on Dalit kitchens and Kumbhar community, who's been left out? I mean, is there any particular community, notable community that you think should have been there and
I mean,
represented the
I
food?
think Bombay's Koli community definitely needs far more documentation because they need, but they have this immense knowledge of different fish varieties and how to cook them. I mean, there's been a brilliant cookbook called Seasoned by the Sea that has come out from Chennai recently. Again, it's a bilingual cookbook, Tamil and English, which really talks about the lives of the fishing communities of the Chennai coast. And something like that, would be really useful in Bombay because it talks about different species. It talks about the different ways in which fishes are used. All the recipes using fish heads or fish guts and things like that, which will never make it to a restaurant. All the dried fish recipes, which will never make it to a restaurant, but which are very key. Now, see this Tamil English cookbook, Seasoned by the Sea, Nedal Kanmanam, which has just come out recently, does that for Madras, the Chennai coast, and something like that would be still could still be done very usefully for Bombay's for the coast of the Bombay region.
Well, Athurva says, thank you for the insightful talk, Vikram. Karen Dubrovsky says, wonderful, insightful talk. Sukhi, love the Idli story. Now that the batter is ubiquitous in Tamil Nadu as well, they should thank Matunga for the idea. Listening to you, Mr. Doctor, is always fascinating, says Jyoti Kerkar. Yeah, so Jyoti was also saying, yes, Hawkins cookbook. My mom had some 55 years back. Need to check with her if it's still there.
Okay.
Chinmay says, brilliant talk, as I said earlier. Well, I think a lot of comments, a lot of appreciation for the talk today. I think it's been really excellent, Vikram. Thank you. I want to see if there's
So, well,
any.
thank you so much for Kaki Toast for asking me. As I said, this is probably the last Bombay talk I'll give, and I'm very glad I was given this platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for signing in for today's talk, and hope to see you again on the weekends ahead with some more exciting talks from Khaki.